Very much. What we're going to do now is we're going to go past all of the speakers that you've heard and give them a moment to respond to things that they want to respond to, but also I have questions. So let me tell you what your questions are going to be, and we'll go in reverse order. So Deborah will start, and I know that Deborah, you'd like to talk a little bit also about your partnership with Netaफ़im.
Oh.
So, so the question that I have for you on the basis of what you spoke about is as I said before, it's very interesting to me that you managed to take companies with small companies with relevant technologies and bring them into country. And I'm curious how you find these companies. Is it all through your web platform, or do you go out and do search for them? So that's my question for you. Let's see if I can stay on a roll. I'm going to tell everyone's question and then sit down over there and just let magic happen, right?
Okay.
So Naty, here's my question. You had mentioned this one model, and the model that you mentioned was we sell to NGOs who sell at a deep discount the irrigation systems to smallholder farmers. And I know that, I mean, I know this drip irrigation system. I know it's a fabulous system. I know the results are amazing. However, it seems to me that there's a scalability problem when what you're saying is that we'll get aid agencies to raise philanthropic money in order to be able to buy a unit which costs X and then deeply discount it to sell it further. Now, do you see a business model at one time involving here which will enable small farmers to directly purchase these drip irrigation systems and use them to promote their livelihoods? So that's my question for you. Dawit? So I think that there was things have changed a lot in the food security world. There was a time when food security just meant producing more calories. And producing more calories, maybe the best way to do it was to bring companies into a country, get them to kick all the smallholder farmers off of the land, or maybe not, but you know, in the worst case scenario, set up these huge, very efficient agribusinesses, and then just produce food. Now, am I correct in understanding that the ATA, as a policy, works with smallholder farmers and tries to find ways to have smallholder farmers contract to these big companies, so that, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about what it means for large companies to work with smallholders and how you help in the mix. Nusret, I mean, I just would be very interested to hear, because you do work with smallholder farmers as a company. I'd be very interested to understand what kind of support you need to give them. You have a very big training program. I'd like to know what you train them in. Where do they need help? And Frank, as somebody who's representing an international organization, I'd like to ask you the same question in terms of you're helping to broker partnerships, and where do you find that as a representative of an aid agency, they really need you? Like, what are the points where they need you and can't do it alone? So those are my questions, and you're welcome to bring up your own questions, your own remarks, and everyone else's. And let's see if we can give 5 minutes for each person now, and then we'll take a few minutes for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Aliza. That's a great question. And actually, it's really been fun to find these technologies. And the way that we started with nothing. We were a new program, went from zero to startup in a few months. And luckily, as being part of Feed the Future, which was broadly publicized, and the U.S. Government's food security initiative, so involved a lot of other government agencies in addition to USAID. We had their platform, and they have something called AgriLinks, and they also have a microfinance platform called Microlinks. So their networks promoted us and our grant program broadly, and then we just started. Literally, we got a Twitter account, we got a LinkedIn group, we got on Facebook. And we went out to a lot of conferences and different venues and started meeting people. And also just through FinTrack's 20 years working in food security, and through the different networks of people on the team, we put everything in a big database. I'll make a big plug for Salesforce.com, which is our web-based database where you can do a lot of push emails and interact with social media. And we just put the word out that. And honestly, when you put the word out and say we have money, it's not that hard to meet people. So I can say that because I came from the other side where I was raising money for the past 5 years. So believe me, your phone rings a lot more when you have the money than when you're looking for it. So that's how it all started, and then word of mouth. Thanks.
Okay, models for partnerships. Perhaps the project that we are doing with FinTrack and USAID on Feed the Future is an example. It's the first time that we are doing something like this. The idea is to build, what are the challenges when we are talking about our case of drip irrigation, introducing it to a large scale of smallholders. Challenge number one is to create a critical mass of a large number of smallholders in a certain region so that we can work together and make a change in that region. So organizing them together, we need a partner. It can be a cooperative, it can be local government, it can be an NGO which is active on the ground. Then we have to build some kind of training, sometimes a training center. It can be a physical one. It can be something that can move on a truck from one place to another. And it can be building a follow-up using the cellular network and the fact that most of the farmers do use a cellular network. The next challenge is financing. So in some places, it is a subsidy, like we saw in India, like we see in Turkey in some places, like we saw in Israel many years ago. But sometimes it's microfinancing through local banks. And then, as I said, the training and follow-up and so on. So the project that we are doing in Kenya with FinTrack, the idea is to try and to locate 1,000 to 2,000 farmers, local farmers, to build a model of microfinancing through a couple of local banks, to build a training center, and to work together with our local representative in building this project. So this is one model. The other model, as I said, is the model that we have in India, where local banks and governments are our partners. And the last, you know, I was, as a young salesman, my territory was the Israeli Arava, the southern part of Israel. And after being exposed to those things that we are doing here, I thought to myself, gee, this is exactly what we had there. We had a partnership. The Israeli government, through the extension service, did excellent job. The diaspora, the NGO was the Jewish agency, which collected donations from Jews in the diaspora, and each farmer got the seed money to start his farm. The private sector was not only us, was seed companies and fertilizer companies and greenhouse and so on, and of course the farmers themselves. So this is the ideal partnership, a four-side partnership.
Okay. So what kind of approaches do we use to connect our farmers to the private sector or investors? So I think some of the models that we've tried, I think two are prominent here. One is the contract farming model, and the other one is the outgrower scheme. So I think there's been some success in the contract farming as opposed to the outgrower, because I guess the difference between the two is when you have a contract farming system, you have your farmers, your suppliers, smallholder farmers, and there's a company that works with them, and so that company helps them in input financing, maybe improve seed, fertilizer, with some of the agronomic practices, and also in aggregation in output financing. And these farmers produce that, the contracted amount, and they supply it to the farmer, as opposed to an outgrower scheme where the actual investor, like the Times of Old, will have a land that it produces, and will have satellite farmers also producing grain, and it works with those farmers to aggregate not just his produce, but also the produce from satellite farmers. But at the same time, it will introduce technologies to these farmers and uses the output. So we have some examples for contract farming, and I would mention some of the international ones. We have also local companies working with smaller farmers, but some of them specifically because I was involved in them. There still is a contract farming project by Diageo and Heineken. These are two big brewers in the world. They've opened shop in Ethiopia. They are working with thousands, I don't remember the exact number this year, but at the pilot phase they'd work with about 10,000 or more farmers in terms of growing malt barley for malting beer. And if you look at the malt barley industry in Ethiopia, it's mostly imported malt barley, but barley can grow in Ethiopia. We can supply the entire Africa with our malt barley, but because of technologies and in beginning from seed, the variety of malt barley we have now, it's I think 20 years old or something. And if you look at the yield and its resistance to disease, it's terrible. So we have these companies that are working with farmers in introducing new varieties, introducing new technologies in terms of threshing and aggregation post-harvest losses. And so throughout the process, we help them identify the area, provide the necessary data, and also during implementation, we coordinate partners that could also give the trainings, introduce the technologies. And I think these projects have taken off on their own. For instance, I think Diageo, this is the second year they're doing it, so they don't even require our support, but initially we're heavily involved. But there are other companies that are very much interested in also coming in and scaling that up. For instance, there's a company, Malt Europe, the largest malter in Europe, is also interested in coming and replicating the same model. So we do that. In maize, for instance, we work with WFP in terms of the Purchase for Progress project, where they actually, instead of importing maize from abroad for food aid, they actually buy from local farmers. And so throughout the process, we help them, and they are following that scheme. An outgrower scheme has not been that successful because it involves land, and land is a very sensitive issue in Ethiopia. So we haven't had that much success, but hopefully going forward, we'll have interesting projects on that front.
Before answering my question, I have a small suggestion. While UNIDO and USAID is here, and we have excellent dripping system that increase the efficiency, and also we have Ethiopia. So actually, what is our main dilemma? We are talking about food security, and I believe drying is the one of the way to keep fruits and vegetables. For example, we have a big demand from US market for mango, pineapple, which are not available in Turkey. We are importing. But there are some countries like Africa, they have full of exotic fruits, and on the other hand, they are not capable to sell. The best way, as far as I experienced, to sell those exotic fruits is drying. When you dry it, you can easily transport, and you are adding a value, and the market is changing. I mean, from the chips, chocolates, to healthy snacks. We call healthy snacks. So my suggestion, under the umbrella of UNIDO and USAID, we can make a project located in Ethiopia by using excellent dripping system, and I don't know.
Let's sign an MOU now.
I don't know. Ethiopia has geothermal water or not, but I have also another drying system by using sun. This is the reality, actually. I mean, we are talking food security. On the other side, yes, we can increase the efficiency, but what is the main problem for small-scale farmers? They cannot sell. why we are wasting the products. Most probably the main problem, they have no access to the markets. So what we are doing, we are contract basing agreements with the small scale farmers, so which means that they are in the safe side. This is a good model for small scale farmers. But I'm very serious that there is a big demand for exotic fruits. In my country, there is no exotic fruits. But with our technology, we are increasing the value of the product seriously. So we have UNIDO and USAID. Maybe this would be the fruitful and tangible result of these esteemed organizations. Thank you.
Well, I get here into the negotiation mode for the, how do we call it? The Ethiopian Drip Irrigation Partnership Program. But I would like to see, you know, what the private sector companies are bringing to the table, except the technology which they sell at market price. So let's open the negotiation before we sign that, yeah. And of course we are interested, yeah. But unfortunately, UNIDO is not a donor. My question I got was about do we broker, or how do we do broker partnerships, and where do we get engaged in partnerships, yeah. And I'm sorry, my talk before was really more of a kind of a conceptual talk about partnerships. Didn't talk too much of what UNIDO does. We are the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. It's not about industries like big factories with high chimneys that we necessarily need to work on. In the agribusiness development branch, it is small-scale agro-processing, manufacturing projects that we engage in, and you have to picture it like we are the guys with the screwdrivers setting up an oil mill, a small-scale drying facility somewhere. Anything which relates to agro-processing is in our mandate, yeah. And we promote that. We have a large pool of consultants, and we have some highly skilled experts on different topics. If it is wood processing, if it is fruit processing, if it is cotton ginning, or all these kind of things. So this is where we kind of have our niche. But of course we know this kind of businesses are embedded in the value chain, and at the end somebody who has a cassava processing plant usually would like to have some assurance of cassava production on their own farm, and then buy from smallholders around, yeah. And so setting up these kind of procurement of primary production is very important. We help actually our processors to do that. And then, of course, it also comes to make market links. And we know that we are not the only ones in all this business. We do partner a lot with people covering other parts of the value chain. And this is a bit how our projects look like. Now, where does a partnership coming in? We have, of course, people who provide processing equipment. This is private companies. We buy equipment from them and bring it to the developing countries. We do training centers. We do pilots, yeah, so people can see this technology, and then we help also in programs that there is upscaling being able to be done via investment programs and these kind of things. But we have to also ensure that the technology we provide, yeah, is kind of good enough and makes sense in this context. And that sometimes we only know after we have been putting the first pilot, yeah, and then the trouble starts to say, oh, doesn't work 100%, and yeah. And this brings me actually to a bit of a challenge to Naty. He was saying before, we have, you know, this is a solution to all the problems, the drip irrigation. That was what he said before. Then last time he said, well, but there is finance, and we were benefiting from the extension service, and we were benefiting from the diaspora, and all these kind of things came together here in southern Israel. And I would say we need to really kind of understand that this innovation process, that somebody in a developing country, a small farmer, does something different than before, and maybe uses a certain technology. This is a kind of a gradual thing, and it's complex. And it's not only the irrigation technology. There is a lot of things to this process which have to do with bringing different things at the table at the same time. You have to have the finance, you have to have a market. Why would you produce a tomato more if you don't really get anything out of it? Yeah, and if it's maybe 10% more, you wouldn't even bother to do this. Yeah, it's not enough. I mean, you have so many other crops, and there's so many other problems, and the water, and the kids, and everything, and then the whole process is also based on trust. It's not so much only a technological process, it's a kind of a social process. People need to trust in what they get there. How do they get this trust? Maybe they talk with some other people. We have been actually researching in those days, my colleague is with me, we have been working on these innovation networks and trying to understand how this works. It's a bit more complex. We need to factor that in. We need to work with organizations who understand that complexity, and then the technology can be introduced.
Thank you very much. Whoops. All right. So we're going to open up the room for a couple of questions, and then we're going to go to a coffee break. So please.
Naty was one of my first extension, one of the first drifters down there 30 years ago. I also teach agro technology and entrepreneurship. I've had more than 7,000 or 8,000 students, and there's two issues that come up, always. There is no middle management in most of the countries, and number two, most of the students, and these are students from universities, don't know their government agro policies. My question for the panel is, what is your blind spots?
Good question.
All right, let's just take that question. Does anyone want to start? That's a hard question.
It's okay to say you don't have one blind spot.
There's spots. I'll go first and just say I think for us, we're a funder, we're in Washington, D.C., and it's great to be part of a company that has a lot of on-the-ground experience in developing countries. But it's still a blind spot to go in and really know how to transfer technology appropriately into a different culture. When you take an American company that's never worked there, and it doesn't matter that even if FinTrack has worked there, there's just so many barriers to overcome, and that's why the on-the-ground local partners are so important. And what Naty was saying, the financing is critical. Even what we think of in the U.S., it's a $300 product, it's perfect for smallholders. Well, you're going into a market where people earn $2 a day, and to give them a $300 product, what are who can afford that? So you have to work with the financiers, and then the extension is huge, and it's, again, in the U.S. we take it for granted because we have this huge public extension system, and it doesn't exist in developing countries, and is a huge barrier to our projects succeeding. So lots of blind spots, I would say, for us.
Yeah, we also have a couple of those blind spots, but I'm focusing now on public-private partnerships for developing countries where some certain knowledge and technology is going to be used for small-scale farmers. That's what we're focusing on, blind spot in that. Yeah. So here I would say UNIDO is a small organization, and we are actually taken at as the guys with the screwdrivers fixing up machines. Yeah. And often the money we get is, the government say, we want, put there on a green field a small factory. This is what we want to see. We don't have one. We're not doing this yet. You bring this there. And then you need to tell them, it's not so easy. Yeah? And then we just get a small portion of money, which is good enough to buy some equipment and do some first training, but that the whole thing has to be embedded into something which makes sense, which makes business sense. There's often not enough money for that, and we fall short. And I think this is a really soft spot here, and it's the soft skills around the kind of the technology skills, which we are missing there.
Protection of intellectual property, I can say.
Okay. I think for us, I will just focus on the practical side. As we are the Agricultural Transformation Agency, so sometimes, although our work, agriculture is a core of what Ethiopia does, the backbone of the economy, we have very little touch point with other ministries. So sometimes it's easy to miss what other ministries are doing. So which is something I just learned in a conference on nutrition, for instance. The Minister of Health has gone on a very different trajectory from what we're doing. And it was very difficult for us, the way we're set up, to know what that ministry was doing. So I think in terms of other ministries are doing, we have a blind spot. So I'll just stay away from the conceptual ones.
We have many blind spots. Just the fact that drip irrigation is only 5% of the irrigated fields all over the world means that there are many blind spots. By the way, in Israel, it is 75% of the irrigation. So in Israel, we have minimized the blind spots. When we go to Ethiopia, and we know that we have an answer, and perhaps I haven't emphasized enough the private partnerships, and I think we mentioned it here, but I didn't emphasize it enough. Working with contract farming, with off-takers and so on. But when we go to the government and we go to ATA, we would like to have, again, as a business, we cannot afford lobbyists and go-betweens and the matchmakers and so on. So we would like to see a one-stop shop with the government. Not having it is some kind of a blind spot.
My chair is in the process of breaking. So that was such a good question. But I think we should end on a high. We're having a coffee break now. Anyone who'd like to further engage the panelists and ask them questions directly, you'll have the opportunity to do that. And so there's coffee waiting outside.